Hi everyone, welcome to Loft 801 and thank you for tuning in. My name is Diego and today's video is going to be a review of Solar Opposites Season 1. Having 8 episodes, it was originally released on Hulu on May 8th of 2020. If you couldn't tell by the animation style or voice acting, this show was developed by the creators of Rick and Morty. Since Season 3 of the show comes out Tuesday, July 12th, I figured it'd be a good idea for me to rewatch the previous ones. Before I hop into my review, if you want to support the channel, please take a second to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell. It's really appreciated. Also, this review will contain spoilers, so if you haven't finished or seen Season 1, please click out of this video. However, if you don't care about spoilers, then you're more than welcome to stay. Lastly, if there's something you want to see reviewed, leave a comment down below and we'll get to it. Thank you. We're hopping in 3, 2, 1. Starting off, I want to mention that I'm a fan of Dan Harmon and Justin Roiland's Rick and Morty. I think this makes me a bit biased in my review, but that's okay. Solar Opposites doesn't fall too far from the Rick and Morty tree. As I said earlier, this is pretty apparent in the animation style and the voice acting by Roiland. The show itself follows Korvo, Terry, Yumyulack, Jesse, and their Pupa as they're stranded on Earth, attempting to leave and terraform another planet. It makes for an interesting setting and offers fun possibilities. Episode 1, the matter transfer array, sets the tone for the series. It's a funny, vulgar adult comedy that isn't afraid to take risks. Some of the jokes come off as crude and crass, but there's plenty of others that more than make up for it.
You boys want some peanut butter cookies?
Oh, she's threatening us. I'm freaking out.
I honestly found myself laughing at a lot of these jokes. As a quick example, in this episode, Korvo and Terry genetically program and create their own friend, Fun Bucket, who ditches them. Jealously, they make a second version of him, but Fun Bucket 2 comes out a little mutated and loopy. It's a silly gag, but the slapstick comedy works for me. On top of that, the episode is visually eye-catching and vibrant. The sci-fi aspect of this show allows for a ton of vivid imagery and pretty animations. Outside of some crass jokes, I thought this episode was an amazing one to kick off the series, and I gave it a 9.2. Episode 2, The Unstable Gray Hole, has a lot to like, at least for me. I forgot to mention this in episode 1, but the entire series has lots of fun and awesome references to the real world. References in this episode range from HOAs to neo-Nazis. Some good themes from this episode are that the more control you try to have, the less control you end up having, and it's okay if some people don't like you because you can't please everyone. Again, this episode is pretty vulgar, but it's also very vibrant. Something I love about this episode is the Pupa. He's a bit crazy and intense, but he still manages to be cute and intelligent. Another thing I really love about this episode is the development of the wall. Yumyulack has been shrinking humans and placing them in an ant farm of sorts, and they've been building their own society. We see this B-plot further develop during the season. I gave this episode a 9.5. The Quantum Ring, episode 3, is also a lot of fun. The gang doesn't listen to Korvo because they're obsessed with magic tricks, so he learns some. After he showcases his skills and earns their praise, he gets cocky and moves to the big leagues. It feels a lot like Now You See Me, which Terry name drops. Overall, I think the jokes and references in this episode work really well. In The Wall, we're introduced to Sherry, and she befriends Tim, Enrique, and his son Pedro. We also meet the man in charge of the wall, the Duke. Sick name. I am so surprised at how much effort the writers put into developing the wall and its characters. This episode does a wonderful job, and we see that miniature life isn't easy and that the Duke is a ruthless man when it comes to keeping the peace. I gave this episode a 9.5. Episode 4 is titled The Booster Manifold, but it should definitely have been titled The Red Goobler. In previous episodes, we've seen that when the aliens are stressed, little alien gooblers come out of them. Korvo is pushed to his limits in this episode, and a hilariously psychotic red goobler comes out of him. This guy is so funny. The gang captures him during the episode, but ultimately he escapes and plots their deaths. This episode had a lot of fun references to SpongeBob, Home Alone, Ferris Bueller, and Dune. Outside of the crudeness, I didn't have any real complaints, so I gave this episode a 9.4. Episode 5, The Lavatic Reactor, was probably the worst episode of the season, but it was still a great episode. If you're an eagle-eyed viewer, you may remember the Lavatic Reactor was mentioned at the end of episode 3 by Korvo at his Taco Tuesday. I love catching details like this because it helps tie the episodes together. The main plot of this episode centers on Korvo being zapped dumb by Terry, and Terry realizing that he has to take more responsibility. It ended with a good message, and I enjoyed it. Despite being centered around aliens, this show has some of the funniest humans. I love Yumyulack and Jesse's principal and teacher in this episode. They are some weirdos. The further development of the wall is fun to watch, and we get some interesting plot twists. Overall, this episode felt a bit slower than the others, but it was still fun to watch, so I gave it an 8.8. The Patricia device, episode 6, is another fun one. This episode takes something human that the aliens don't understand, man caves, and tries to give them meaning to the aliens. In their constant attempts to fit in, they create a psychotic, man cave destroying robot. It's an interesting concept for sure. Something I also liked was the intro. It was very reminiscent of Family Guy and Peter Griffin driving. The B-plot was also entertaining. Jessie tries to topple Patriarchy, but is unsuccessful because the boys at her school are super supportive of women. Overall, the episode is fun, and I gave it a 9.1. Moving on to episode 7, holy crap. I don't even know how to start with episode 7. It was genuinely a masterpiece to me. It's titled Terry and Korvo Steal a Bear, and we get a few glimpses of this, but this entire episode takes place inside the wall. The perspective of life from the mini-humans is incredibly unique, and the show has been building up to this gem. The plot focuses on Tim, Sherry, and the resistance to bring down the Duke. In a sense, it's like Star Wars with the Empires versus Rebels. In this episode, we can see that the Duke has been abusing his power and gained weight. It's such a small detail, but it's awesome that we can see it. The relationship between the farmer and his mouse is heartwarming, but the mouse's sacrifice is heartbreaking. I wasn't expecting the Duke to be so savage in the name of a greater good. His society was challenged, so he drowned half of it. Absolutely insane. As the episode ends, we find out that the Duke had access to a hole outside of the wall, but chose to stay inside and build what he deemed to be a better society. We see Tim make the same decision, and he stabs Sherry. The religious and societal undertones are off the wall in this episode. It's by far my favorite one to date. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Moving on to episode 8, we see the pupa finally start to transition into its final form. It changes from yellow to pink, so the crew decides to go back in time to learn more about the pupa and its transformation. As usual, Terry and Korvo hurt each other's feelings. When they reunite and console each other, they recall scenes from earlier in the season and some really cool things that didn't happen, such as them playing basketball in Space Jam with The Simpsons. The B-plot of this episode is a bit tricky, but it all works out well. Essentially, Yumyulack is learning to be a nicer brother to Jessie, but this turns out to be a simulation inside a simulation. It's very reminiscent of Rick and Morty's M. Night Shyamalan episode. Overall, I gave it a 9.4. I was genuinely surprised at how much I like this series. I thought season 1 was an amazing way to kick it off. I think this show is definitely for young adults and older. It's very vulgar and crass, but the jokes work really well, especially when combined with the slapstick comedy. Another thing I really loved about this show was the attention to detail. We see the episodes reference themselves, and we see subtle things such as the Duke gaining weight. Speaking of the Duke, the B-plot of the season, The Wall, was by far the best part of the show. It could easily be its own standalone series, but I hope it stays in the show. It's a plot that grounds viewers as opposed to the wacky antics the aliens partake in. Anyways, if you kept track of my scores, then you know as a whole I rated season 1 a 9.4. If you're a fan of Rick and Morty or looking for a crazy comedy sci-fi show, I recommend watching Solar Opposites. Thank you for listening to my review of Solar Opposites Season 1. If you enjoyed the content and want to support the channel, don't forget to leave a like and hit the subscribe button down below. If you agree or disagree with me, let me know in the comments. I'd love to read what you have to say. If there's something you want me or my friends to review, leave it down below and we'll get to it. Lastly, if you want to see some more from me, feel free to check out my vlogs linked up above or my podcast, Friends with Benefits. My name is Diego, and I'll see you next time.